Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live here on Tuesday, December the 3rd. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me on X at JT_Ruhnke. Once again, I am unfortunately not on a Victory Tuesday this week. How quickly things change. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief over at Sobros Network, part of the Football and Other F Words podcast, and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing today on this fine Tuesday?
Pretty tired, JT. Listen, there are many things that I hate about myself, but chief among them is that I've never been the type that can fall back to sleep after I wake up. Like once I wake up, I'm up. And our cat has figured out that, hey, if I just slam the bedroom door against the wall, just all my weight, take off running, jump into the door and slam it against the wall, my people will wake up and then maybe they will give me food. And so at 4:30 this morning, I thought meteors were hitting the roof of our house, but it was just my cat asking for food and couldn't go back to sleep. So now I'm dragging all day.
Gotta love cats, man. But you know what? We're gonna drag through it together. We're gonna thug it out because just like my allergy to cats, I also have allergies right now, and my voice just continues to kind of melt away. And you know what? That's okay because we're going to, have to thug it out just like the Titans are right now. But we cannot do so without our lovely sponsors of this show, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages. If you know 440 Sports Network, you know them. If you are new or happen to be joining us here for the first time, we're happy to introduce you to them. More on them later. Stoney, before we start with whatever that Titans blowout loss was on Sunday, we do have some breaking news because this is the, bombshell of the day as the Titans defensive back Julius Woods has been suspended 6 games without pay for violating the NFL's performance enhancing substance policy, the league announced today. I mean, you kind of look at what he's done over the last couple of weeks here with the Titans, and while it's not showing a lot on maybe the defensive side of the ball, he was playing a decent amount of snaps on kick coverage, on kick returns, on punt coverage, on punt returns. This is a guy who was helping that Titans team, at least on the special teams, play competently at some times. So yet another piece on the Titans special team unit that once again has not looked good. He now will miss the rest of the season, I guess, because there is only 5 games left in the season. And he gets suspended 6 games. So unless the Titans were somehow mathematically able to alter space and time to get back into the playoff race here, it certainly seems like that will end Julius Woods' time this year. I mean, we can start with, with this Titans game. Before we go with that, any thoughts on Julius Woods, or is that it with him?
So 6 games, you said, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
So it would be 5 this year and another next year then.
I believe so. I think that's how that works.
Right. That's crazy, man. The Julius Wood era over before it really started. Clearly, I think the main takeaway here, JT, is that we have to fire Colt Anderson because this happened under his watch. So
there you go. That's
Get
it.
Your
That's
pitchforks.
Big brain take right there. And if you have thoughts on Julius Woods or anything else about this Titans game from the past weekend, like Eddie saying, "Rip J Wood," Ed Henry saying, "Oh no, there goes special teams," and Eddie also pointing out that he does like the fact that Julius Woods got more time for juicing than Azeez Al-Shaair did for taking Trevor Lawrence's head off.
Yeah.
That's a whole situation in and of itself. Going down in Houston today certainly seems like that's a fun place to be right now. Nonetheless, Julius Woods, for taking performance-enhancing substances, he will no longer be playing for the Titans this season, or probably next year. I don't know. It might be a tough sell if you're suspended for the first game of the season. However, Sonny, we since last time we talked on this podcast here, which was last Tuesday, we left off with a couple of questions about, if the Titans were to win against the Washington Commanders, they would have to do a bunch of these things right, and these things would have to go their way. And how would they, be able to answer our questions? And when I went back and looked through that list, and when I was rewatching that show last week and prepare for this one today, I was pretty astounded because the Titans didn't do anything we said they needed to do to win this game. And it's really funny because it seems like, right or wrong, win or lose, we are right on the pulse of this Titans team. We talked about how the Titans needed to do these things correctly if they wanted to win against the Houston Texans. They did a lot of those things, and it brought them a win. We followed it up with, if the Titans do these things, they probably will find themselves winning. And then they don't do any of them. Actually, they do the opposite of all of those. And we get the 42-19 blowout loss like they had on Sunday. And I think the first one we got to talk about is the special teams. Once again, man, I hate having to talk about special teams this much, but like, generational record, the generational run right now for Colt Anderson and his squad. Just the back-to-back performances, always keeping you on your toes with these special teams mishaps. And once again, this comes by way this week of Jaquan Jackson, the Titans punt and kick returner who had been their mainstay guy for the last 12 weeks or so. He fumbles in that kind of first quarter, early second quarter fiasco that the Titans had to go down 28-0 on Sunday. And Nick Suss points out that by his count, that was 5 fumbles for Jaquan Jackson this year. Not all of them lost, but 5 fumbles in the return game. And so because of that fumble, it kind of was the nail in the coffin for Jaquan Jackson on Sunday, where he was replaced by Tyjae Spears on kickoff return right afterwards. He did end up coming back to serve in the punt return role once the game was very much out of hand. But I mean, once again, we talk every single week about how it's all Colt Anderson's fault, blah, blah, blah. All these things that Colt Anderson can be doing better, when in reality, it continues to be the lack of execution by players here. And as Kenneth says, excuse me, how dare I, the future Pro Bowler Jaquan Jackson, who I didn't know where to put this in the show. So thank you, Kenneth, for reminding me here and giving me a second to talk about it. Jaquan Jackson is the only player on the Titans right now who is a favorite to make the Pro Bowl as a kick returner, which is really funny because, spoiler alert, it really does sound like Jaquan Jackson will not be returning kicks or punts for very much longer for this Titans team right now. As Brian Callahan said this week, that Mason Kinsey is an option at returner. Also, some free agent acquisitions are on the table for the Titans. More on that in a second. But back to what I was saying, like, it really does feel like since maybe the Lions game, for people might not want to hear this, but it really does feel like when these issues have gotten as bad as they were, Colt Anderson has been able to coach it up and fix it to where they weren't as bad as they were. And now the issues we're seeing for this team really feels like it's just a lack of execution. You look at last week with Cedric Gray on his first ever snap of an NFL game, missing the tackle, allowing Dameon Pierce to run down the field 80 yards. Jaquan Jackson continuing to fumble and have issues there on plays that, I mean, it's just inexcusable. It's not like a defender made a good play on him. He just is struggling to catch the ball. I don't know what it is with these Tennessee Titans returners that just simply cannot kind of hold on to the ball. And then you talk about other guys earlier in the season, like Jack Gibbons, just struggling to make blocks. They take him off of the punt protection. Like, those are things that the Titans have adjusted, and Colt Anderson has made changes. But at the end of the day, still, there's only so much Colt Anderson can do to keep Jaquan Jackson from simply not catching the ball. Like, that is not a Colt Anderson issue, in my opinion. That is a Jaquan Jackson issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think JT, we're talking about special teams for I don't know how many consecutive weeks this is at this point, but I actually thought the unit, large sample size of the entire game, coverage was actually pretty decent in this game. I thought the Gunners did a good job of getting downfield and kind of pinching the returner to take away any potential escape lanes on the outside. They got down there quicker. There were a couple of times where the returner caught the ball and the nearest Titan was closer than 20 yards away, which is something we were talking about earlier on in the season. It felt like guys were blocking long enough, just long enough, that sweet spot to get the punt off, but then getting downfield quickly and kind of clogging up the middle of the field to prevent big returns. It felt like that by and large, the unit was okay as a whole, but when you have a fumble like that, and when you have the issues that you've been having on this unit that you have all season long, you don't really get the grace of forgiveness at this point. And so it's one mistake that people are going to get their pitchforks out and they're going to call for the special teams coach's head again. I don't know how you justify this fumble, JT. I don't know if you actually went back and watched like the all 22 angle of it. I don't see how Jaquan Jackson lost this football. Like it looks like some cartoon shit where there was a string tied around the ball or something, and Jaquan was just running with it, and somebody up in the booth just yanked on the string, and it came flying out of his hand as he was working through the contact there. Inexplicable. And again, I come back to it watching the tape. I think, wow, special teams actually looked a little bit better this week, but because of this fumble, it's going to stir up old wounds. It's going to get this fan base mad at the special teams coach again, because it's easy to look at that and say, oh, here we go. Special teams costing the Titans plays yet again. It's not a good look. And I don't mean to take up for Colt Anderson so much, but I just don't know what he is supposed to do about issues like this, because they are churning players. And I don't think Jaquan Jackson would have been back out there returning punts later in the game if they could have found somebody else to do it. I don't think they want to put Tyler Boyd in that spot. Mason Kinsey wasn't active for this game, so it was more or less like, we're going to ride him out. And from here on, I personally would be surprised if Jaquan Jackson is back out there as a returner, because guess what? If you're a good special teams coach, you don't put the worst possible returner back out there. So I give Colt Anderson a little bit of grace. I've given him grace a lot this season. That was a player execution issue that I think if you don't have that, you don't have a couple of bad penalties on special teams too, if I'm not mistaken. If you don't have those things, I don't think we're complaining about special teams this week, which kind of feels like a step in the right direction, as bad as this unit's been.
Yeah, and I think Eddie kind of talks to your point there, where it says at what point does lack of execution become a coaching issue? Like if the players continue to make mistakes, maybe the coach sucks at teaching, which is fair. And why, as much as I want to say that it's not Colt Anderson's fault, at some point I do also agree that it's most likely the fact that Colt Anderson will not be the special teams head coach or the special teams coach for this team if it was up to me next season. Because at the end of the day, even though they're not the guys out there getting the players, you still, I think what he's done as a whole, he certainly hasn't created opportunities on special teams either. And whether or not that is just the conversation that Jaquan Jackson was never going to be the guy back there to make these, these plays on special teams like maybe Tyke Tolbert and Colt Anderson thought he could be. I know we've talked a lot over the last 2 weeks about Malik Washington and how he was on the board when they drafted him. You can't really, that argument is now null and void as well here.
Well, hold on, JT. I want to push back.
Okay.
Let's not slam Malik Washington because he just happened to muff a punt in a freezing cold game the one time the nation was watching the Dolphins this season. All right, we can't let that one bad play negate the entire season prior to it.
I mean, it is true, but
I'm still
still, I
taking
mean,
Malik Washington over Jaquan Jackson.
I probably would too, but there is now a sample size that both do, in fact, muff punts and fumble the ball and cannot take care of the ball, whether or not. But like, yeah, I agree with
Fair enough.
you there that, as much as like there's only so much Colt Anderson can do, but still at this point, Colt Anderson is not exactly creating opportunities either, which, that also can be a great criticism of his coaching game there. Kenneth
Well,
asks,
I think it's interesting because we've heard Brian Callahan kind of talk about the disconnect between the practices, what they see throughout the week, and how it doesn't really translate to game day at times. And so, just in the context of that, it makes me kind of wonder, like, does Colt Anderson see something differently throughout the week that ultimately just isn't translating on Sundays? And to Eddie's point, I do think a vast majority of coaching is teaching. And if guys aren't where they're supposed to be, they don't know their assignment, that sort of thing, I think that is on coaching. But from what we've heard consistently from this coaching staff, is that they don't feel like guys don't know where they're supposed to be. It sounds like things are executed in practice a lot differently. So for me, the challenge that Colt Anderson faces is like, how do we pin down where this disconnect is, and how do we get the things we're seeing throughout the week to translate to the field?
yeah,
Like, to me, that's the big mark. And I don't think that I'm not advocating for Colt Anderson to be the special teams coach in 2025. I'm just saying that, like, a lot, all three of the coordinators, well, we'll say the defensive coordinator, the special teams coordinator, and the head coach, because he's the play caller. They've all had moments this season that have been questionable. But I think it's also fair to say for all three of them that if it's a player execution issue, I don't know what you can do about it. And if it comes down to it, I think all three guys understand that it is a bottom line results oriented business. And regardless of whether it's your fault or not, if you get to the end of this season and you have a historically bad unit, your head is the one on the chopping block. So all of that is to say, it might not necessarily mean that Colt Anderson is at fault for a lot of these special teams issues, but he might need to go anyway, just for the optics.
Yeah, that is a great way to explain it there. And, as there is still time for Colt Anderson to show us things. So what is the fix right now? Mason Kinsey has done it. I think that's the most logical one. Kenneth brings up the option that Tyjae Spears possibly an option. I do think that at least on kick returns, that is definitely an option. Punt returns, I don't know. That's something that I think we'll see play out this week. I personally wouldn't be mad at that, considering as much as we all love the ability of what Tyjae Spears can be, injuries have been a factor this year. Tony Pollard kind of coming back into form also has really negated a lot of the play I think Tyjae Spears could have. I certainly think right now, if you were asking me, why isn't Tyjae Spears getting more run in the backfield? It's because Tony Pollard is just doing what Tyjae Spears can do, but at a greater rate right now. Like Tony Pollard is playing out of his mind right now and is playing some really good football that you don't need Tyjae Spears to be that change of back guy. So if you want to get the explosive guy who has the elusiveness of a Tyjae Spears out there, punt return could be an option. Another option, which, it seems like this is perfect timing. The Bengals yesterday waived wide receiver Trenton Irwin, who has a lot of prowess in special teams. He is a guy that Brian Callahan knows well. You talk about how the Titans brought in a former Bengal last week to help with special teams, Ronnie Stanley. Could the Titans give him a look there as well? Potentially, but I think at the end of the day, Stoney, I don't know if you disagree with this or have a different opinion, but I think it is just to roll Mason Kinsey out there right now, because I think Mason Kinsey also can play the Jaquan Jackson role as well on those jet sweeps. Like Jaquan Jackson's role now in this offense and on this team really feels null and void at this point, unless you want to give him two of those like jet sweep designed runs or to be a clear out guy in a game. Like besides that, he really just right now doesn't feel like he's bringing a lot to the table.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like his biggest value that he added to this roster was as a returner. And like Eddie points out in the comments, if he's not a returner, he needs to be off the roster. I mean, they're not using him on offense. They're using him very sparingly. I think there probably are some creative wrinkles they can throw his way, but they haven't seemed willing to do that so far this season. And they traded DeAndre Hopkins. Traylon Burks is on IR. Like there's been an opportunity to get Jaquan Jackson more involved in the passing game, and they just haven't done it. So I don't know if that's a coaching decision. Maybe they don't like what they see. Maybe they don't quite know where to fit him in. Maybe they don't want to overplay him if he's, getting his whatever special team snaps. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But if he doesn't add, if they're not going to use him on offense and he doesn't add a whole lot of value as a roster or to the roster as a returner, then I don't really know what purpose he serves for this football team. And if that's the case, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised if he's a cut candidate come season's end. So I don't know that he is a guy that is long for this roster. I think to answer your question, I do like Mason Kinsey in this spot. I think he's proven he can handle the responsibility. He's already on the roster. There's nothing that Jaquan Jackson was doing that Mason Kinsey can't do. So they have a reliable guy kind of waiting in the wings in that spot. You might as well use him and see if you can get some sort of spark. And I'm not opposed to the idea of churning guys either. If you want to keep the flow going, keep that rotation going, then bring some new guys in if you want to. I've got no issue with that. But it seems as though Jaquan Jackson has just flat out lost the job at this point.
Yeah, I'd agree. And to your point there, like I would keep my eye out really for Trenton Irwin this week, see if he lands here. Just so much good connection there. He's also when Brian Callahan was there, was used a sneaky amount in that offense, especially not last year with Andre Yosevich and Charlie Jones kind of becoming more of a factor in that offense. But even before that, like Trenton Irwin, he had his moments there. And so I would keep my eye out for that. But yeah, I think it's Mason Kinsey. All right. We spent way too much time on special teams. And I'm hoping that come next year, we can, at least have a normal amount of special teams errors and maybe some good special teams things, because I think I've talked about special teams worth a lifetime in the last 13 weeks. And I think that's enough for me personally.
I think it's kind of fun. I haven't watched a lot of special teams until this season, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So it's been kind of like, I mean, you know me, like I got to know how everything works. So I'm like spending hours at night going down YouTube rabbit holes of like how to coach special teams and who's supposed to do this. And it's been kind of nice. Maybe we should just start a hot read special teams podcast only bonus for the extra subscribers.
I'm sure people would, if you would like that, reach out and maybe I'll take you seriously on your offers there. But for me personally, I think it's not my favorite thing to do, but that's okay, because when you don't like to do the things you don't like to do, that's where our wonderful sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages, help you out. Sinkers Beverages has been serving the East Nashville area for over 40 years, and they are a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year. Got to go out there and see their selection, because it is absolutely unreal. I took a trip out there myself before Thanksgiving last week. It was absolutely hustling and bustling over there. It was crazy. It was a madhouse, but they hooked me up. They got me all set up for the wonderful family time I got to spend over the past weekend. You got to follow them also on Instagram and Twitter at SinkersBev and Sinkers.Nashville on Instagram. Got to sign up for their in-crowd, where you get special allocations and benefits and bi-weekly tastings that you can only know about if you join their in-crowd. Also got to give a special shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, where they've been serving that local crowd for over 50 years. And if you can't make it out to either of them, or specifically Sinkers, don't worry, they have you covered, because you can simply search Sinkers into your phone and they deliver the booze to you through Uber Eats. They drive so you can drink. Thank you to Sinkers and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring the show. Okay, so we talked about special teams for 30 minutes. Hopefully we can talk about something else here, which is, I think we were alluding to this earlier, but we talk about some of these coordinators having their moments. And certainly over the past couple of weeks, it really does feel like Denard Wilson has had a couple of moments that make you scratch your head. And in terms of how this team prepares against mobile quarterbacks, I wrote an article yesterday over at Broadway Sports Media talking about how the Titans may have a problem when it comes to defending rushing quarterbacks. We've talked a lot this season about how the Titans run defense, no one runs on the Titans, according to Jeffrey Simmons, unless you are literally a nobody at some times, because you had guys like Chris Rodriguez Jr. and Jeremy McNichols, #former Titan, just kind of running all over you. McNichols, 5.3 yards per carry. Chris Rodriguez Jr., 7.2 yards per carry in his game with a long of 25. Like, the Titans were just kind of getting killed. And this has been a common theme for this team when they're going up against mobile quarterbacks, whether it is the mobile quarterback himself or his backfield mates. It seems that this team just simply does not know really how to handle mobile quarterbacks. And we saw that once again as the Washington Commanders hung 276-ish yards on the Titans in this game. And I want to just take a step back here and kind of look at what these mobile quarterbacks have done in these games. I estimated about 6 games that the Titans have played against mobile quarterbacks. That is, you can go back and talk about Malik Willis. I threw Tyler Snoop Huntley in there. I think that one's debatable, but I just threw it in there because, people know him as a rushing quarterback to an extent. Talk about Josh Allen, talk about Drake May. Whether people like it or not, Justin Herbert is a mobile quarterback. That dude loves to run. If you haven't gotten to watch Justin Herbert film, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun watching that white boy run. And then, of course, Jaden Daniels this past week. That's 6 games there that they've played against, quarterbacks who pose a threat on the ground. In those games, out of the 1,441 yards the Titans have given up against the run this season, 890 of those rushing yards have come in those 6 games. The quarterbacks themselves have made up 275 of those 890 rushing yards. And so it's not nothing right there to say that when the Titans play against mobile quarterbacks, it really feels like, you look at what they've been able to do against teams that don't have a passer who can move outside the pocket versus these, and it feels like they're just playing a totally different style of defense. And so this is something that I think our buddy Easton Freeze, former host of the Hot Read podcast, asked Brian Callahan about yesterday. What exactly is the issue and the root cause of all of this? And so here's what he had to say on the run issues.
Yeah, I think there's the 2 things that are involved in that. One, I think the scheme with the quarterback run game is unique. They do a good job. We didn't do a good enough job. I don't think we fit a couple of runs well enough. And sometimes when you misfit a run, it pops for 5 or 6 and when you wrap it up. But we misfit a couple that pop for 15 and 20 and 30. And that's where the issue comes in. So we definitely misfit some runs. We weren't necessarily gapped where we were supposed to be gapped out. Part of that's the linebacker spot. I thought we could have been better setting the edge, physicality-wise. I thought that there was 1 or 2 that got out on the edge that we didn't do a good enough job. So it's an everybody issue. When you give the runs up the way we did, it's especially in a one-back run game, it's the old one back, one gap, and everybody's got to be where they're supposed to be. And you have one guy out of position, that can lead to an explosive run. And that's what makes run defense hard, is that everyone's got to be right, and we weren't right enough times.
What efforts, if any, were made in game to try to address the bleeding in the run defense?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to Denard probably more about the specifics of calls and stuff, but certainly try to find some things that, try to hit a couple calls that you can try to knock a run or two out, which we did a couple times. But really it was just the accumulation, one of them having a big lead and being able to just keep handing the ball off, and two of some misfits and not necessarily gapping the runs out the way they should have been. And again, you just over time of the game, it wore on, and we couldn't quite stop the bleeding in the run game over the course of 4 quarters. And again, there was some good stuff that happened, but it's the ones that we missed that they made us pay for, unfortunately.
And I think that answer there, which is more of a long-winded answer, kind of just plays into the part where these different types of defenses, I think, bring such a dynamic challenge to this team that already struggles to execute altogether, that when you have these types of quarterbacks, it makes it just that much harder. You kind of go back and you can look at the Brian Robinson Jr. first run where it goes for 40 yards. Like, Jerome Baker did not have the greatest day yesterday, or on Sunday, I should say, nor did Kenneth Murray. But those are the types of things that, when you have a quarterback like that who commands that threat, and it takes a second or two more than it normally takes when you're going up against these types of mobile quarterbacks, that's where you get really into trouble. And so you look at some of these games over the past season where, they go up against these mobile quarterbacks, and when you're playing against quarterbacks who aren't really known to run a lot, like say last week with the Texans game, in terms of total EPA and total success rate in that game, they were second and third in the league respectively. You look at a game like the first game of the year against Chicago, 7th and 19th against in terms of total EPA and total success rate respectively. Like those are the games where you can really see them lock down. Counter to that, you look at some of the games where the defense had to play against these mobile quarterbacks. Take week 3, for an example, against Malik Willis. They were 19th in total EPA, 6th in total success rate in that game. You go and you look against Josh Allen in that run game, 27th total EPA, 22nd total success rate in that game. You go into a game like against Justin Herbert in the Chargers game, 25th in total EPA and 24th in total success rate. And then like Jaden Daniels in this game, 28th total EPA, 29th total success rate. It certainly seems like it's just a challenge, and it's because this team, whether it is the injuries or because they simply do not have the personnel to keep up with it, it's creating massive problems.
Yeah, and I don't know how into the weeds you want to get on this, JT, but I've watched the tape, kind of prepared a few notes about what might be going on here, and I kind of want to take a stab at this thing in this particular game. It's interesting to me to see how Washington attacked the Titans defense, because first of all, I felt like just from a physicality standpoint, the Commanders as a whole played like they were simply unwilling to lose that game on Sunday, and the Titans could not match that intensity. They ran the ball with that sort of attitude as well. They put a lot of bodies at the line of scrimmage, and sometimes they were run blocking, sometimes they would show run and then run out on a route and pass the ball, that sort of thing. They were throwing tight ends at the edge routinely, and the tight ends were winning those matchups against Harold Landry and Arden Key. So then when you think, okay, well, there's a gap scheme here, or they were pulling guards. I mean, it looked like Bill Callahan's scheme executed to perfection. So if you can trust your tight end to just go out there and kick out Arden Key, kick out Harold Landry, whoever's there, and then you still got a guard pulling around to that same side of the field to block whoever's left there, it's a numbers game. And there's nobody there at the second level when your linebackers are crashing to the same gaps. There's several times on tape, like two guys hit the same gap, that sort of thing. Jerome Baker is picked up by the running back on a stunt, so he's ineffective. And now they're able to just block their scheme up the way that they want to. And when you can do that, and when you're doing it efficiently, it becomes a numbers game. And when you have the numbers advantage, you can run the ball pretty well. We've seen it. With Denard Wilson's scheme, he wants to just rush 4 a lot of times. And he was doing that quite a bit against Washington with the linebackers coming up to fill the gaps. So even when they were filling the gaps, they're rushing 4, and Washington's just putting that extra tight end out there, and they're sealing those blocks because there's no threat at the edge. I'm so glad that Brian said that. Like, they can't really seal the edge. Their edge rushers that are out there are being neutralized completely, and Washington's able to just run around it. So even if these things are blocked up and you get a body on a body, well, then guess what, JT? The quarterback's left open. There's nobody left to guard the quarterback. And if the quarterback can take off and run, he's going to do so. So I think there are some flaws in philosophy in how Denard Wilson attacked this run game. But I think for the most part, by and large, the Washington Commanders just did a really good job of identifying, okay, well, they're going to rush 4 here. They're going to bring the linebacker around. So let's have the running back pick up the linebacker. We'll have the tight end get out to Harold Landry. We'll run to the right side, executing those plays. I also think Denard Wilson's formations in this, when you overload the left side of the offensive line, the Commanders just said, okay, we'll just run to the right because our tight end's hitting those blocks at the edges, and there's nobody at the second level because they're dropping deep and playing zone. So if we can just get to the second level, all we got to do is make a man miss and go on a big run. It was kind of impressive on Washington's part and frustrating on Tennessee's part to watch that run game unfold the way that it did, because we know that the Titans are capable of stopping the run in certain points. But I think the key is when you have a quarterback that's a threat to run, a lot of what we've seen from this scheme is that they may jot it down block for block on paper on the whiteboard. But then when those blocks are executed and you can't win those blocks, there's not anybody left over to account for the quarterback until you get to the secondary players. I don't know if any of that just made sense. I just vomited all of my notes on this onto my microphone.
No, I think it does, because, you know, it feels like there is this little notion of like Denard Wilson style being so aggressive to a fault that it really feels like, you know, what we've heard from players across this season. Go back to the Arden Key comments with the Drake May, like, not worried about that because we are so aggressive and we are going to execute and get to our spots that none of that really matters because it feels like we have the upper hand. The problem is, just seems like a lot of these players just aren't at the caliber that this Denard Wilson defense really needs right now. And a lot of that could be from injuries. You look at the injuries that they've lost. Jack Gibbons, far and wide, was their best run defending linebacker over the past couple of weeks, according to PFF grades, and just kind of watching the tape as well. Losing Quandre Diggs, who was a very important safety in the run game, also really, really hurts. When you have guys like Harold Landry and Arden Key just not even being impacts at all, like throughout an entire game, and the opposing offensive line can really focus just on Devondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons and take them out of the play, you're left with a Kenneth Murray who is one of the worst run defending linebackers right now, according to PFF, and you're left with guys like Jerome Baker, and it just doesn't feel like, you know, without guys all over this roster, and we'll get to some who are probably going to miss time upcoming, like, it feels like they're not going to change the way the defense is ran right now. And really, that is a problem, and it's troubling because you just don't have the players right now to execute what Denard Wilson wants to execute. And so I think that is the biggest problem right now for this team. And you kind of look at the schedule going forward from here. You have 2 games against what most likely will be Mac Jones. You have a game against Anthony Richardson. That is probably the one that you'll point to next when they go to Indianapolis to say, okay, like, show us something that you can actually stop a mobile quarterback in this run scheme, because that that running back room of Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson is nothing you want to scoff at, as bad as maybe Anthony Richardson is at making mistakes and his decision making right now in the passing game. That's a guy who can beat you on the ground. And so, I do think we'll see this defense come back and kind of revert to the form we saw earlier in the season, but there still are opportunities for offenses to make this defense not look the best.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on what you added there, JT. For one, I did notice several plays where Washington was just double teaming Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat both, because they knew they could execute those run blocks at the edges one-on-one with either the available tackle or the tight end, depending on alignment. So again, it goes back to, if you can keep this defense from penetrating, interior or otherwise, the whole thing kind of unravels behind it. But it also, in this game in particular, I thought it had a really interesting effect. Like the defensive line, the defensive front was not able to penetrate consistently on the Washington Commanders offensive line. And so that made for less traffic when Washington pulled one of these linemen. If they pulled a guard or pulled a tackle, pulled whoever, and ran them across the formation to get to the other side, they were able to do so uninterrupted because the defensive front could not generate a push and muck up the run lanes like we've seen happen to the Titans, where they call a good gap run, but the puller can't get to a spot because there's penetration. So when you can't penetrate, not only is your entire defense out of that, suffering from it, but you're not hindering Washington at all from being able to move how they want to move after the ball snapped. And it's just a really frustrating thing where it felt like this defense got into a position where there was just nothing they could do to stop this Washington rushing attack. It was very efficient. Terry McLaurin said after the game that they were just taking what that defense was giving to them. And from running the ball to throwing against the zone coverages that they were running, that seemed a little atypical from what Denard Wilson typically wants to run. I don't know if that was an injury thing or what, but this Washington offense was just able to operate at will and do whatever they wanted to do on Sunday.
Yeah, and certainly you look at time of possession, 40 minutes and 13 seconds to the Titans, 19:47. Certainly is going to do your defense no favors in terms of staying off the field and getting time to rest and catch your breath. That is certainly something that also did not happen there. I do like how you brought up our third thing that we said the Titans last week had to do if they wanted to win this game, and that is defending the middle of the field. Like I said earlier, rough day for Kenneth Murray and Jerome Baker all around. I mean, you look at Terry McLaurin, what he was able to do, catches all eight targets for 73 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. Zach Ertz also had a nice day himself, 3 receptions on 6 targets for 35 yards and a touchdown as well. Some rather easy touchdowns as well, might I add, because like you said, the double teams were able to get onto Jeffrey Simmons, T'Vondre Sweat, not creating a lot of pressure, meaning Jaden Daniels had all the time in the world back there. And that's the kind of thing that you see from a quarterback like that. If he gets time, much like Sam Darnold did, and you let the play develop, that's how they're going to get you against this Titans team. And so
even when they were successful, I mean, it's not like the Titans never got home. They sent extra guys and they pressured Daniels at times too. But even then it was like, okay, you're going to do this. We're just going to get the ball out immediately on a slant in breaking route, find the weakness in your defense, and we're just going to attack it. It was kind of masterful the way Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels were in sync against this Titans defense.
Yeah, certainly did not help the narrative that Cliff Kingsbury cannot coach and scheme up late in the season. So good job, Titans there. But it does bring up a question here that, you look at the injuries from this game. Roger McCreary exited the game with a shoulder injury. Kenneth Murray, towards the end of the game, had a hamstring injury, which he exited. And, Brian Callahan said that both of them are kind of to be determined this week. So you may, even though you might get Chido Awuzie back this week on the outside, you might be down Roger McCreary now. Like, the Titans cannot catch a break there. And I do think it's really interesting that I noticed this on Sunday as well. In relief of Kenneth Murray, sorry to the let's see what Cedric Gray or James Williams can do crowd out there in terms of linebackers, but Luke Gifford, of all people, special teams ace, was out there trying to defend against the run, which is not something that you really want. Now, will that change this week? Who knows? We'll have to see with the injury report, but all of this to say that if you're running like a Jerome Baker, Luke Gifford kind of tandem out there at linebacker, and you have no Roger McCreary, not to look too early into this, but regardless of who the quarterback is next week for the Jacksonville Jaguars, which it most likely and all but certainly will be Mac Jones, Brian Thomas Jr. might destroy this team this upcoming week, which I think is a scary thought right now with how he's playing. So, I mean, that, if you have any thoughts on what they were doing in terms of that zone coverage, would love to hear it. But I think that pretty much encapsulates just kind of how we thought the Titans should have been able to shut down this team. And because they weren't able to execute, like, none of that happens. And that's how you get blown out 42-19 and struggle to come back in a game that seemingly was already lost.
Yeah, I've been critical of Denard Wilson's performance in this game. I will say that I think it looked a lot worse in real time. Once I went back and watched the tape, I realized there were a lot more mistakes that you'd put on the players, the missed tackles, bad angles, penalties, that sort of thing. Like, those are player issues that I probably shouldn't have factored into my evaluation, if you will. But I still think a big critique of mine for Wilson would be playing all of the zone that he did, because man, Washington was able to just feast on it. They just picked it apart for the most part. And I couldn't understand why. But as this game unfolded, Roger McCreary goes down, Kenneth Murray goes down. You're watching this defense in the second half. You're like, man, there's just no speed on defense right now. There's just no speed back there. And I don't know if that's why Denard was calling a little more zone, kind of hoping to put more bodies back there and clog up the throwing lanes, that sort of deal, because it was terrified of getting burned in a one-on-one situation. I don't know. I was being a smartass on Sunday and asking people if Tavondre Sweat is the fastest player on defense right now, just to illustrate my point. But I do think that there is some concern there that if Denard Wilson feels like that the zone coverage, kind of bracketing guys, is the way to defend offenses right now with the personnel that he has, then that terrifies me against a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., who I think was one of the more underrated prospects in last year's draft class. I was, at times, 1 o'clock in the morning watching tape, gone off that go-go juice, if you know what I'm saying. I'm thinking Brian Thomas Jr. is wide receiver 1 in this class. I didn't actually put that out there anywhere, but I say that to say this is a guy that has some speed that can really burn this defense. And if you're Mac Jones, he's the type of guy that you don't have to be dead on balls accurate to hit. Like, you just put it somewhere around him and he's going to get to the spot. And that is a terrifying matchup when we start looking forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And so, yeah, once again, that'll be an interesting conversation to have on Friday. Won't know about the availability of a guy like Roger McCreary or Kenneth Murray until later this week. However, before we get out of here, and Kenneth in the comments earlier saying, oh boy, I can feel the Levis excuses coming. Let's throw him the $250 million bag while we're at it. He's lucky, because guess what? It's not coming today. I would love to, but my voice is about to die. So we'll save that conversation for Friday. However, I do want to just get a quick vibes check on a little bit of the excuse making we heard from certain players after this game, and just kind of get your thoughts on it. I went ahead with the obviously Jarvis Brownlee Jr.'s interesting comments, and Jeffrey Simmons talking a little bit about maybe being hungover from their win against Houston, and kind of edited them directly to what Brian Callahan had to say on those comments. So first, we'll give a quick listen to what both the players said after the game and Brian Callahan's comments on Monday, and then kind of just talk about where this may have come from, your quick thoughts before we get out of here. But first, here is what kind of transpired with Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and his thoughts, and then Brian Callahan and what he had to say on Monday.
I think guys ain't come out playing fast enough. Like you said, we had a lot of turnovers in the first half, and that was during the first quarter. So I don't think guys was locked in anymore. I think guys let the cold get to them. Because, like me, I'm a Florida guy. I don't like the cold, but I know what comes with playing in this profession. And sometimes, you're going to have to play through things that you don't like. And I think guys let the cold affect them today. A lot of guys ain't going to say it, but that's what I think happened.
How do you respond?
Yeah, of course. That was alarming to me. We practiced in it all week. We were out there all week. It was colder here at practice than it was in the game. Again, if that's the case, that to me sounds like that's an excuse. But no, that was about as fair weather a game as you could possibly ask for in December. So I can't comment on where that would have come from, to be honest, Paul.
So, I mean, that, at least for the first one, I mean, it's, you gotta just have to laugh at it at some point, because I mean, unfortunately for Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who we love and who we think is a great player, it's not getting any warmer the rest of the season. Like, which is tough.
Tell me you're from Miami without telling me you're from Miami. That's pretty crazy. It's funny. We've had some fun with it over the last couple days on Twitter and all that, but I give the guy some credit for speaking his mind, and maybe, like, if we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he's just spitballing. He's just trying to think of what's going on and just pulling something out of his ass to try and explain what happened on Sunday.
Yeah, no, I agree. And at the same point, it really did feel like kind of talks to the fact that he talks about, like, we just simply weren't ready. Like, it seems like Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and the rest of this team, which we'll hear from Jeffrey Simmons, was trying to grasp at straws of what went wrong and why they weren't ready for this game. Obviously, like, both these teams really could stand to have this game. You talk about the Titans, who have not won consecutive games back to back since the Todd Downing DUI incident. Like, that was the last time the Titans won back to back games. After that Green Bay game, they went on a 7-game losing streak, and then they haven't won back to back games since. Like, that's something that I think the Titans, a lot of these players who are still here from that moment, want to get off their backs. You talk about a Commanders team who was reeling, losing 3 in a row. Certainly it seems like that was the more desperate team, and they were the ones who wanted it more, flat out, plain and simple. And so here's what Jeffrey Simmons had to say after the game, kind of talking about the possibility that they may have just been hungover from the success in Houston.
We got to learn how to have success. We don't know how to have success. We started off too slow, all phases of the ball, from top to bottom. I mean, that first half wasn't Titan football, and I don't know what it was. Like, we, from top to bottom, from everybody who had a part of this game, we didn't come in. Felt like we was hungover. We were hungover from success, and we didn't come out ready to play. And go down 28-0, it's going to be hard to win in the National Football League. So you have to be better.
No, not at all. I mean, that's no. As I even said last week, is that, it's one win. We haven't arrived. We haven't done anything that would require us to have to worry about that. And all we're trying to do is stack good weeks together. And I thought we were on a good trajectory, a big win on the road, and then to come out and play the game the way we did was just disappointing. To go down in that game early and not be able to come back. And there's no part about anything that I feel or our team should feel is that. We guys should have an issue dealing with that. And again, that's after the game and in the heat of the moment. But yeah, we shouldn't have had any issue. Absolutely. I mean, it all ultimately is my responsibility. And if that's the way that the team feels and something didn't go right, and whether I was aware of it or not, if that's the sentiment, that's a sentiment. And I can assure you that's been addressed.
So, I mean, once again, it feels like Brian Callahan sticking up for his players who simply just like him, have no answers to why they came out as flat as they did. At this point, I think it really is a matter of, and we heard from Daniel Brunskill as well. Like, if you take my big thing from this is that the excuses are the excuses, but I don't think it is, in any way a question of Brian Callahan losing the locker room in any respect or anything like that. We heard from Daniel Brunskill, who kind of told the message of, in that second half, go out there and play for yourselves, if nothing else. And by and large, you saw the team play a lot better than they did in the first half. But like, at the end of the day, right, Brian Callahan is going to be the guy that's going to save face for a lot of these players, but goes back to that conversation that the coaches can only do so much. The coaches cannot go out there and execute for their players. And so at the end of the day, yeah, it is unexcusable to make these excuses, but here we are, and we're having a good laugh about it. And you hope that guys like Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who TJ says, although he's a rookie, he's trying to navigate it. I totally get it. Like, these are the growing pains for a team, a 3-9 team that is looking towards the future, I think.
I'm just ready for this season to end. At this point, I'm just ready for this season to end. No, I agree, and I'm glad that you brought up TJ's comment, because he more eloquently puts what I was trying to say. Like, a young player trying to navigate speaking to the media. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons been in the league for quite some time now. I don't know. Like you said, I liked the phrase that you used, grasping at straws right now. And it feels like guys are, at the very least, if we're going to try and glean a nugget of positivity from this, is that at least guys, even if they're putting their feet in their mouths, at least guys are being open and honest about this and not just recycling coach better, play better back at us.
That's a great angle, and I think that's where we're going to leave it. Not because I want to leave it there. It's mostly because I think I'm going to get off this podcast. I'm just going to go mute for 3 days, and we'll be back to. Don't worry, Kenneth. We'll be back with some Levis talk, because I do want to touch on that on Friday's show.
I got notes.
We got some notes that we'll break down, and yeah, you know what? Who knows? Maybe there is maybe we'll have a number that's above $250 million that we can throw at Will Levis. I don't know. We'll keep you guessing, Kenneth, on how much money we would. Yeah.
If I may, one last thought, because
yes.
I've been getting absolutely reamed this week for posing the question, can we have the Denard Wilson conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say, I like Denard Wilson, just like I like Brian Callahan. It doesn't mean that each coach hasn't had their moments of weakness this season. The frustration from my part is for these people. They're still in my mentions. They're still in my mentions this week talking about fire Brian Callahan and make Denard Wilson the head coach. I don't know what team you guys are watching. I don't. And people keep cycling through these yardage stats. Well, Denard Wilson had the best pass defense in the league. Denard Wilson had the 4th best overall defense in the league. Learn what metrics actually matter and cite those, and then maybe I'll hear the argument. Use your eyes, people. Watch the games. Watch the games. Denard Wilson has not been perfect. So if you're going to come out with your pitchforks and you're going to call for Colt Anderson's job and you're going to call for Brian Callahan's job, I think we can put Denard Wilson on an even playing field. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking, is keep the same energy when he makes coaching mistakes as well. I think ultimately this is a good coaching staff that, if given time, and I don't know that they'll win enough games to buy themselves time, if given time, I think they can put it all together. I think schematically on both sides of the ball, there are reasons for hope. This is just growing pains for the coaching staff, much like the roster's having. They need time to gel as well as the players do. Thank you. I'll step off my soapbox.
Well, I think that was a strong end there, and I hope people do match the energy and come back to the show on Friday to have a discussion about that, Will Levis, and so much more, as the Titans look to have a positive record in something this season by getting a win against the Jacksonville Jaguars next week, and Mac Jones and everything that comes with that lovely game. But Until then, we will talk to you then. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show, and Bluegrass Beverages. Shop at Sinkers. Order them on Uber Eats. They drive so you can drink. And until Friday, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you then.
NWI for life.